W.F. Howe's, an RB Media audio brand, presents Chronic Understanding Pain by Gillian Best, narrated by Patricia Rodriguez. RB Media is the largest audiobook publisher in the world. Find your next great listen and get exclusive offers at rbaudio.com. For Carrie. Prologue. I'm writing this from the hospital. It's cold and brightly lit. My nurse today, a lovely woman named Jolly, is frowning at the cannula because I won't bleed for her. It's nothing personal. I'm just not a great bleeder. I can feel her try to shimmy the needle into my vein a bit more. Something about seeing her do that makes it hurt. Or maybe that's just what I think. So I look away. What I do know is that we need to get 3 vials of blood, and so far we've got maybe half of one. Jolly gets the bright blue elastic band, and together we tie it on my arm, just above the elbow. We leave it there for a moment, and then untie it, both of us watching and hoping the vial will fill. No such luck. She massages the vein, which doesn't work. So we move my arm off the armrest and see if gravity might help. It doesn't. I apologize profusely for the stubbornness of my blood. We decide to cut our losses and try after my infusion is done. Every 8 weeks, I drag myself here, where I'm greeted like an old friend by the nurses who welcome me into the biologics day unit. I'm assigned a chair that's more like a bed, and someone weighs me and puts a cannula into my arm. Blood pressure, heart rate, and temperature are all checked before they hang the drip bag that contains my medicine. I'll sit here for the next hour and a half while it slowly drips into me, delivering something called tumor necrosis factor alpha blocker, or TNF, that's meant to suppress my arthritis. I think of it as a Xanax for my immune system, which really needs to chill out. I've been coming here every 8 weeks since May 2023, when I came for my first of 3 loading doses. This was after most of the other biologics I could try didn't work for me and my main diseases, which are ankylosing spondylitis, AS, and Crohn's disease. AS is an inflammatory autoimmune arthritis that causes my spine and hips to do their best to fuse. It is, quite literally, a pain in the ass. That's how it first presented for me. A pain so excruciating in my sitting bones that I couldn't get out of bed to go to the bathroom. When I was 18, my brother brought me a skateboard and wheeled me down the hall to the toilet, so I narrowly escaped having an accident. Doctors call AS a complex condition, which means that it's an overachiever when it comes to symptoms and other related issues. You can have Crohn's disease with it, like I do, a really miserable eye disease called uveitis, where your eye can go really red and inflamed, and which can, in some cases, make you go blind. Or your pupil takes over your whole eye, which then starts leaking. Any light, even the dullest, feels like 1,000 hot knives stabbing at your eye. This form of arthritis can also give you excruciating pain in your ribs or chest. I get this. It's absolutely horrendous. It feels like a heart attack. It's called costochondritis, this inflammation of your rib joints. Anyhow, you get the picture. AS is not a disease you want to get. 1 in every 200 people in the UK have this form of arthritis, which is twice as many as multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. On the McGill Pain Index, it's right up there with childbirth and kidney stones. I've had kidney stones and can confirm that's a very accurate pain scale. And at least the kidney stones go away eventually. AS is with you for life. Even though I'm not in agony every day, my pain is significant enough to take biologics, which I started trying about 5 years ago. Most of those medications are available in the self-stab EpiPen format, but not the one that works for me. And that's why I'm here, at the Biologics Day Unit. There are 8 beds in this unit, where people stay for as little as 30 minutes and as long as 5 hours. In the middle of the room are a couple of stands. One has a laptop, the other has masks and biscuits. Beside that are 2 disposal bins. The soundtrack is muffled talk and the beeping of drip machines. I seem to run afoul of my machine pretty often. It complains by beeping loudly whenever I bend my arm too much. A nurse will come over and tut gently at me, straighten out my arm, and remind me that I have to not bend so much. It's not like I'm doing yoga. I'm just tapping away on my laptop. But there's no pleasing these machines some days. While I'm here, the machine and I are tethered together. It's my ball and chain. It comes to the bathroom with me, which can be tricky. The drip rack handles about as well as a supermarket trolley. For now, the treatment works well enough for me to keep taking it, which is good, because just some, of the side effects are diseases that don't come with happy endings. The side effects can range from the banal, headache, nausea, to the concerning, heart failure, to the deeply worrying, malignancy. Half of the cases reported are lymphomas. When you're willing to take your chances with cancer, you know your pain is bad. I'd rather not take this drug, or any of the other drugs that are meant to treat my disease. Even the milder side effects aren't fun. Long-term use of a type of drug called NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, things like aspirin, naproxen, have given me tinnitus. A drug that used to work really well for me, called Vioxx, was taken off the market because people kept having heart attacks. There are times when the pain is so bad that I need what I like to call my big girl painkillers, things like kidney stone grade codeine, tramadol, or a nice antispasmodic like baclofen. Because when you've been holding yourself in a twisted, contorted posture for days on end, hoping this flare will pass, you can't just relax out of it. Getting the painkillers I need when I'm in excruciating pain is no small feat. More than once, I've been asked if I'm drug-seeking. I've been given, begrudgingly, the most meager prescription for something that never really takes the edge fully off. Have you tried paracetamol? A hot bath? That's not bad advice, but when I'm crying because I'm in so much pain and exhausted because I haven't slept due to the pain and can't really eat because of the pain, it's not like these drugs really do the trick either. Usually, they just make me care less about the fact that, for instance, my neck doesn't feel strong enough to hold my head up, and I can't move it to the left or right, or up or down. Other times, maybe they'll knock me out enough so I can sleep when my ribs hurt so much it feels like I can't breathe, sit, stand, lie down, or move around. I'm grateful to the kind nurses and doctors who treat me. And I'm grateful to the researchers who developed the medication I take, because it really is a game changer. But I don't want to go to the hospital all the time. I don't want to worry about scary side effects. I don't want to be sick anymore. I don't want to think about my body and the ways in which it's dysfunctional, broken, or just plain hurts. I'm tired of designing my days around keeping my body functioning. It's exhausting. The treatment that works today could stop tomorrow, or I could be taken off it because the side effects become intolerable. I've spent more of my life in pain than not, and what I really want is a cure. There's a chance that a new treatment some researchers in Germany have developed, which has cured people with a disease sort of similar to mine, might work. But it's a long shot. I'll need to find a cellular target. And to do that, I'm going to need to talk to some really clever researchers. But just in case I can't find a cure, I'll happily settle for some answers. I want to know where pain comes from. Why don't our existing drugs treat it very well? Where are the new drugs? What are the next treatments for chronic pain? Who's working on this stuff? What are they doing? To find out, I'm going to talk to the world-leading researchers and scientists working in chronic pain, rheumatology, genetics, immunology, and psychiatry so that I can understand pain, what it is, where it comes from, and importantly, how to get rid of it. I want to understand what we're doing now and what the future could hold. This book is about my quest to understand my true enemy, chronic pain. Getting to the bottom of questions I've had for years. At the very least, I'll get a better understanding of how chronic pain works and how we might one day get rid of it. What have I got to lose? Certainly not a lot of blood. Back in the biologics unit, my infusion is finished. Jolly comes over after her lunch break and we try again. She presses the vial into the cannula and we go through the process once more. She massages the vein. I tell her I've spent my infusion drinking a ton of water. She tells me it's not my fault. And then, finally, the blood starts to sort of reluctantly drip out. We get enough to run their tests. The cannula is removed, and the drip stand and I part ways. I'm free to go about my life for the next 8 weeks until I'm back and we go through the whole thing again. Chapter 1. Pain. The Basics. Pain is so fundamental, it's hardwired into us and all other animals. It gets overlooked in medicine because people go for the disease. And yet what takes people to ask for help is often the pain. I'm not saying we shouldn't treat disease. Of course we should. And if the pain goes away, that's great. But too often, it doesn't. Amanda Williams, Professor of Clinical Health Psychology, UCL. Chronic pain. If you've got it, I feel for you. We're not alone. It's estimated that 1.5 billion people live with chronic pain around the world. That's a lot of people in a lot of pain. I type pain into Google, and some related searches include symptoms, treatment, and examples. But my favorite has to be, is life worth living with chronic pain? I'd argue that when you got chronic pain, what you call life and living are different. I'll put my hand up here and say that I don't have it as bad as some people. I know other people have it so much worse. I'm not immobilized. I'm able to hold down a full-time day job and generally make my life work. I'm also lucky enough to have a very supportive partner, family, and employer. I have everything necessary to function as well as possible. I also have a well-stocked pharmacy at home, a smaller traveling pharmacy, and a heating pad in almost every room of my house, because who wants to fiddle around with a plug behind the couch when it hurts to move? But what exactly is chronic pain? Traditionally, we're taught that it's any pain that lasts longer than 3 months. That's what the NHS will tell you. But it's not just that. If you're suffering from chronic pain, you know it's so much more than that. It's your life. We need a definition that represents how we feel and what we go through, and one with enough room in it for everyone's pain, so we can get the treatment we need. Amanda Williams, Professor of Clinical Health Psychology at University College London, UCL, has proposed, along with her colleague Kenneth Craig, a more expansive definition of pain. In their paper, they write, "A definition needs to work for clinical and experimental pain, for humans and for other animals, for excruciating and for trivial pain. It needs to distinguish pain from all other sources of distress, from specific anxieties to existential angst or profound grief." They were asked to suggest a new definition for chronic pain, but were reluctant because they thought it should be for a multidisciplinary group to develop, as it had been before. But what they did provide was this. Pain is a distressing experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage, with sensory, emotional, cognitive, and social components. Professor Williams tells me that what is important, I think, is that for humans there should be cognitive and social components alongside the sensory and emotional components. There's a lot of room in that definition, and that's good, because it needs to cover a wide variety of things. And when we take all that and add time to make it chronic, it makes it easier to believe everyone who says they're in pain. Not that belief is a cure in and of itself. More on that later. But it's a good start. There's a shift happening in the way we think about pain, and that affects how it's treated. Previously, doctors might have focused on treating your chronic pain at the site where it hurts, but now we're seeing a move towards introducing psychology to ease its impact. Before we go any further, it's really important to highlight that using psychology does not mean that people aren't in physical pain. All the researchers I spoke with for this book went to great lengths to say, sometimes over and over again, how much they believe people who say they're in pain, and how much this isn't about it being made up. The thing is that our brains are really strong, and this approach is working. I don't know about you, but if there's a way to ease my pain that actually works, I'm here for that. There are 3 flavors of pain, and they all suck, obviously. But it's important to have these classifications for a lot of different reasons. The main one being treatment. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't treat it. And even in the sometimes murky world of chronic pain and confusing symptoms, there are 3 main classifications that are helpful. The first is the kind of pain we've all experienced from time to time, the sharp, achy, throbbing kind. That's called nociceptive pain. The International Association for the Study of Pain, IASP, describes it as pain that arises from actual or threatened damage to non-neural tissue and is due to the activation of nociceptors. It's the non-neural tissue that I want to highlight to you here. Not brain stuff is what it boils down to. What are nociceptors? The IASP says, a high-threshold sensory receptor of the peripheral somatosensory nervous system that is capable of transducing and encoding noxious stimuli, or a part of your nervous system that can turn damage into pain. The second pain features numbness, tingling, and weakness in your hands, arms, or feet. That's neuropathic pain, and it's caused by damage to a part of the somatosensory nervous system. The most common cause? In the UK, it's nerve damage from diabetes. Neuropathic pain is nerve pain that happens if your nervous system messes up or gets damaged. You can experience pain from any of the various levels of your nervous system, and those levels include your peripheral nerves, your spinal cord, and your brain, which, when taken together, form your central nervous system, or CNS for short. And the last kind is one that maybe you've heard your doctors talking about, called nociplastic pain. And you get it a lot in fibromyalgia, headaches, and low back pain. This type of pain is different from nociceptive pain in the way it produces symptoms. We don't really know what causes this third wheel of pain, but researchers and doctors reckon that augmented central nervous system pain and sensory processing and altered pain modulation play prominent roles. The short version is that this is the pain that lives in your brain. Symptoms here include pain that's more widespread or intense, or both, and includes things like fatigue, sleep, memory, and mood problems, like depression. This type of pain can occur in isolation, as often happens with fibromyalgia or tension headaches, or with ongoing nociceptive or neuropathic pain. A classic example here is chronic low back pain. The Lancet, an important and influential medical journal aimed at doctors, helpfully adds that it is important to recognize this type of pain. And part of me feels like we should put that on a banner in the GP's office. The article goes on to say that treatments for other kinds of pain aren't going to work very well on this type. The first time nociplastic pain was mentioned in a scientific paper was in 2016, and there is still some controversy around it, mostly that its name is misleading, and that it may not exist as an autonomous phenomenon. This type of pain arises from actual or threatened damage to non-neural tissue and is due to the activation of nociceptors, which are high-threshold sensory receptors of the peripheral somatosensory nervous system that are capable of transducing and encoding noxious stimuli. So it's pain that happens when tissue outside the brain perceives or experiences damage, and nociceptors get switched on. As to where this type of pain comes from, the most likely triggers, things that might predispose you to it, include a history of abuse, environmental exposure, and genetics. Oh, and this won't be surprising if you're a woman. Studies show that in female mice, it's easier to induce this kind of pain than in male mice. The importance of the neuropathic nociceptive distinction is that if we're talking about drug treatments, drugs that treat one don't touch the other, and vice versa. The vocabulary we have to describe pain is also really important. Traditional options include burning, sharp, stabbing, throbbing, cramping, aching, radiating, dull, and shooting. But it feels like chronic pain deserves something more, especially when you consider that 1/3 of the world's population is in pain every day. When I speak with Professor Simon Beggs, Associate Professor, Developmental Neurosciences Department at UCL's Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health, he reminds me of something that's obvious if you've ever tried to describe chronic pain to a doctor. It's really tricky to accurately convey. It's not well described. The biggest cause of sick days is lumbar back pain, and people say, "Oh, I've had that. It's all right. You just get moving and you're fine." And that's not the same as someone who's got crippling arthritis, but it's all the same word that describes it, because everyone has an experience of pain, so they think everyone else's experience is the same. He says, chronic pain is devastating. He's not wrong. When you're telling someone, a friend, family member, or coworker, about your pain, and they say, "Oh, I've had a bad back. Here's what I did." As Professor Beggs says, those helpful suggestions will be so woefully inadequate as to feel insulting. Pain is such a personal, individual experience that it's difficult to get across the idea that some pain is different than others. But pain isn't a competition. This is what my sister, who has the same disease I do, and I are always trying to explain to our mother when her 80-year-old back aches. Everyone can be in pain. Everyone can hurt. That's valid. But for some people, it's so much worse. But if we don't tell doctors about our pain, they can't try to treat it. Before each rheumatologist appointment, I fill in 8 questionnaires, providing my specialist, Professor Raj Sengupta, with a picture of what my disease activity has been like over the week preceding the appointment. Disease activity seems like a fairly weak euphemism for pain, but some people can have a lot of disease activity and no pain. Questionnaires may seem lo-fi or woefully inadequate, but how else can we measure pain? Remember the definition that Professor Williams had? Pain is an emotional experience. Even if we could measure pain in a really simple and straightforward way, how you experience it and how I experience it are going to be different because we're different people. But why do we even have to measure it in the first place? Doctors have to be able to measure it so they can treat it. Medicine is numbers-based. Your pain is a 6 out of 10. The doctor gives you a tablet. You check back in a few weeks later and the pain is a 3, so the tablet works. When I started my infusions, we took a baseline of my pain, which over a week was something like a 6. After about 3 months of infusions, I did my pain scores again, and they were much lower, so we could say that the infusions were working. It's difficult to put into words the vastness, the sheer enormity of chronic pain, and the strange world it can plunge or drag you into. The days where you're too ill to work and sort of drift around in agony, thinking about your pain, trying everything and anything you can think of to ease it. And when that fails, doing your utmost to bear it. Time moves differently on those days. It's slow and foggy. It's a solitary state in which you exist, a miserable sort of limbo where you're constantly braced, waiting for things to get better or worse. I remind myself when I'm in this state that it won't last, that things will get different. I never say better. That feels dangerous, like I'm setting myself up for the kind of disappointment that's difficult to get over. There's not much else you can do in this state but live through it. You endure pain. You ride it out. Of course, it's not just you who has to somehow cope with this. It's everyone who knows and loves you. I wonder sometimes which is worse, suffering through it yourself or having to watch someone else go through it, knowing there's no way to help. They can be there for you, listen to you, help with chores and life admin, but that never feels like enough. Or rather, that's not how they want to help. They want to take the burden of living with pain away, but they can't. Sometime early on in my relationship with my partner, I had a flare. A band of super deep, low pressure flung itself across the UK. Low pressure is often a trigger for me. And sure enough, my AS flared. It was the first time my partner had ever experienced me in a flare, wincing with every movement. My mom sent him an email, a sort of introductory email, I guess, about what it was like caring for me when I was going through a flare. She always talks of a particular facial expression I have when I'm really suffering. For her, that's the telltale sign that this is really bad. But not all days are like this. There are better ones. And when you get a string of them, and they turn into months and even years that are only punctuated by a few bad days, you get to a point where you feel almost normal. You do your exercises, take your vitamins, get enough sleep, and somehow the pain stays away. Until it comes back. It always does. This is almost always followed by a well-meaning question from a person with good intentions who is genuinely surprised that your pain is back. Why is this happening to you? What have you done? When someone asks this question, it can feel like you're being blamed, as in, you were doing well there. Why'd you let yourself fall off the pain-free wagon? As though it were a personal decision. As though any rational human who is very familiar with the limits of pain-killing drugs available would ever willingly put themselves in a position to experience pain again. It's not like we miss it. If you confess you don't really know why the pain's back, that seems to provide, for some people, an opening to speculate. They'll list off reasons why their grandmother's arthritis flares up, which segues into helpful suggestions of how to alleviate the pain, and that almost always includes things like apple cider vinegar and chili peppers. At no point in time are these helpful souls interested in hearing about the fact that medical science hasn't quite worked it all out yet. There's fear behind the question, a worry that if the world really is random enough for me to be in this much pain for no good reason, then what's stopping it from attacking them? They're afraid of this random stroke of bad luck. It's important for there to be an answer to why my disease is behaving like this, right now. People who are outside the day-to-day living with chronic pain need to believe that cause and effect is a fact. I know the answer is that I have ankylosing spondylitis. That's why my body hurts so much. This is not a good answer. Yes, but why? You were fine yesterday. I almost certainly wasn't, but probably the pain was manageable, and so I didn't bother mentioning it. Even with the people who love you the most, there's always that feeling, and sometimes it's just a twinge, other times it's quite sharp, that they will run out of patience listening to you. It's exhausting. Chronic pain and chronic illness. You can't go through life expecting people to listen every morning as you reel off a list of body parts that hurt. They find it exasperating, and after a while they can't take it anymore. The grinding monotony of chronic pain and chronic disease are really the hardest parts to bear. It's the consistency of it that catches people by surprise. Maybe it's because sometimes there are days and weeks even when the pain isn't intolerable and you can look and act like a normal person. That can trick anyone into thinking that things are better, that the pain is gone. The truth of the matter is that I don't know, and the doctors don't either. Maybe it's just that. After having this disease for so long, I've become used to the unpredictability of it. Sometimes there's a reason for a flare. A long-haul flight is never easy, or if my schedule is too packed and I don't get enough time in the pool or out walking. But it doesn't have to be those things. You never really know. And I suppose if you don't have to get used to that, it's hard to understand why anyone would. But what if there was a chance to develop a cure? On the 15th of September, 2022, The Guardian published an article called Scientists Hail Autoimmune Disease Therapy Breakthrough. The stand first read, Study finds CAR T-cell treatment sends lupus into remission, raising hopes it could be used to treat. In CAR T therapy, T cells, part of our immune system that normally kills infected cells, are taken from a person's blood sample, grown in the laboratory, and reprogrammed to recognize and kill cancer cells, just as they would naturally attack an infected cell. The reprogramming is done by introducing a gene for an artificial protein called a chimeric antigen receptor, or CAR for short. It's used to treat rare, incurable cancers such as leukemia, lymphoma, and multiple myeloma. It was the very last line of the article that sent my mind into overdrive. Several other autoimmune diseases. These include rheumatoid arthritis. After reading the article, I could feel my hope coming back. I decided that I'd try to engineer a situation where I could be involved in a clinical trial of my own. That's not quite as far-fetched as it sounds. My day job is in UCL's fundraising department, so I've seen how, with a generous donation, clinical trials are started. I've been doing this for over 12 years, and I've become familiar with some of the big deal areas of medical research, particularly cancer, which is why I knew what CAR T therapy was when I read that article. UCL happens to be leading the way in the field for this kind of therapy. In fact, the university holds 117 CAR T-related patents. For the patients in the article I'd read, CAR T therapy has cured their lupus. Full remission. 100% cured. This therapy had essentially rebooted their immune systems. Nothing's perfect, though. According to Cancer.org, possible CAR T-cell therapy side effects can include cytokine release syndrome, CRS. As CAR T-cells multiply, they can release large amounts of chemicals called cytokines into the blood, which can ramp up the immune system. Serious side effects from this release can include fever, trouble breathing, nausea, vomiting, headaches, and fast heartbeat. You can also experience nervous system problems, which can include symptoms such as changes in consciousness, seizures, and trouble speaking and understanding. My rheumatologist, Professor Raj Sengupta, is a wonderful human being and quick with a smile. He's open-minded, curious, and exactly the guy you'd want on your team, a specialist who genuinely listens and treats his patients as equals. When I told him about my idea, he said, "Okay, come to my research day and we'll talk about it." I went and didn't so much talk with him about it as bombard him with ideas. This idea of patient involvement in research isn't out of the ordinary. In fact, these days, it's often a requirement to include patients in your research proposal to help guide the work. Why would you want to involve the public and patients in your research? PPI, patient and public involvement work across research, has developed over the last 20 years from being a nice idea to do if possible to a funding requirement for big name funders. The push has come from researchers and their funders, but also from patients and the public. There is increasing evidence that health research done with PPI gets better outcomes for patients. Why? Because patients get to prioritize research topics that matter most to them. And because patients who live with health problems are often in better positions to know what the unanswered questions are to their condition, and what research would most likely improve their quality of life. Plus, patient input at the very start is more likely to improve recruitment to clinical trials. Raj agreed to think about my CAR T-cell idea and said he'd check with his research partner, who coincidentally also works at UCL. Raj agreed that if this collaborator, Pedro Machado, professor of rheumatology and neuromuscular diseases, thought the idea had legs, then we'd arrange a call and talk about next steps. Great, I thought. Job done. I sat back and made a list of all the fundraisers I knew who might be willing to help me get funding for a clinical trial. If you're not familiar with clinical trials, let me fill you in. It takes about 17 years, on average, to get from bench, foundational science idea, to bedside, treatment. And even after you get through a successful clinical trial, it's not like you just snap your fingers and the drug's available. New drugs usually go through 3 trial phases. Phase 1 does basic things like determine if the drug is safe, what are the side effects, and how the drug works in the body. They last between 1 and 6 months, and usually include from 10 to 50 healthy participants. Phase 2 trials last between 3 and 18 months, have about the same number of participants, and look at things like how effective is the drug, how much of it should be taken, and how often. This phase also looks at safety, because the trial is using a larger group of people, so uncommon side effects could appear. Phase 3 trials last from 12 to 30 months, have 30 to 100 participants, and check out safety, efficacy, and whether there's a risk or benefit to a specific population. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you have to do to start a clinical trial. Things like get ethics approval, recruit patients to test it on, get a sponsor, an entity, usually a university or a pharma company, who will be legally responsible for the trial, a funder, chief investigation officer, national coordinating investigator responsible for each trial site, and a principal investigator. This is the person in charge of the research site. If you run a trial for a new drug at a university in the UK, it'll cost you on average about £1.2 million. That's just the one phase of your trial. That doesn't include all the years of foundational research that has to be done just to get to that point. After that's finished, the data from clinical trials are documented in a regulatory filing and submitted to the local relevant regulatory agency. Then, the marketing application is reviewed by the local regulatory authority, and then the drug is, hopefully, approved by the local regulatory agency if its benefits outweigh its risks. Then it's made available. And that's if the drug passes all the trials. Pedro got back to Raj about my idea of a CAR T clinical trial for AS, and the answer was no. The therapy wouldn't work because we didn't have a cellular target to train the CAR T on for ankylosing spondylitis. And that was that. No target, no trial. But I don't give up easy. I suppose that's one thing I've learned from all these years living with pain. When it hurts, you have to keep moving. If you don't, you might just get stuck in that position forever. Chapter 2. Can CAR T-cell therapy treat my diseases? The short answer is no. University College London Hospital was one of 3 hospitals in the UK running a trial testing CAR T-cell therapy on lupus, just like the researchers in Germany, led by Georg Schett, that were the focus of that article I'd read in The Guardian. In February 2024, they opened an international Phase 1 study to learn more about the safety and what the potential side effects were. The trial was the first in the UK to look at the potential of CAR T therapy to treat a disease other than cancer. The patients enrolled in it all had lupus. What happens in cancer to make the CAR T cells is that the patient's white blood cells are genetically modified to recognize and attack problem-causing cells, in particular B cells, a type of white blood cell that creates antibodies. In people with lupus, B cells become dysfunctional and produce too many autoantibodies, causing inflammation in healthy tissue. This inflammation is what leads to many lupus symptoms. When the symptoms and inflammation aren't under control, they can cause organ damage. So the idea of this new therapy is that CAR T would help to get rid of the cells that are causing the problems in the first place, through training the T cells to kill the B cells. Better yet, researchers hope that the one-off CAR T therapy will reduce or even remove the need for lifelong medication for patients with severe lupus. That sounds awfully close to a cure, doesn't it? The first person in the UK to have this treatment is 32-year-old Catherine, who had the therapy administered in Manchester in July 2024. She'd tried all the usual treatments, like steroids and immunosuppressants, and they didn't work for her. She'd been living with constant joint pain, extreme fatigue, inflammation, and a weakened immune system. She told researchers, "I'd lived a normal life until my late 20s, but getting lupus turned my life upside down. I had to give up my job in banking. I had difficulty just getting out of bed, climbing the stairs, and even doing day-to-day tasks. I was forced to adapt to living life in a different way. I cried happy tears going home from that appointment, thinking that there was a chance I could wake up every morning without pain, being able to do things like play with my daughter, and imagining all the possibilities of living a somewhat normal life. It felt amazing." And at about 6 weeks after the treatment, she said, "Even though I wasn't expecting to feel this better so quickly, I do feel I have more energy, and I have had no joint swelling. I'm feeling hopeful for the future." It's easy to empathize with Catherine as she moves into this exciting new world where her pain is so much less and where she gets to enjoy life instead of manage her disease. Dr. Maria Leandro is an investigator on the trial and is part of UCL's Division of Medicine and a consultant rheumatologist at University College London Hospital. When she and I meet to chat about the trial and the potential it holds, she starts by telling me that she came to the UK from Portugal, and when she arrived, she did a PhD with Professor Jonathan Edwards. This is important because he was instrumental in the discovery of the use of B-cell depletion therapy, rituximab, to treat rheumatoid arthritis. B cells are a type of white blood cell that make infection-fighting antibodies. They're a massively important part of your immune system. Rituximab was developed and licensed originally for lymphoma, but they extended the use to rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. It's mainly used to treat non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. The idea was that in rheumatoid arthritis, it was the B cells that were behind the inflammation. B cells can also produce harmful autoantibodies, which attack the body's own cells and tissues. This is an autoimmune disorder. If you have an autoimmune disease, you'll be familiar.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.